Shame often arrives without warning. It can happen in a single moment, a harsh comment, a sudden laugh from a crowd, a whisper that spreads faster than truth. One instant you feel like yourself, and the next you feel stripped of something invisible but essential. A mistake becomes a spectacle. A weakness becomes ammunition. And somewhere inside, an ancient instinct awakens, reminding you that humiliation is not just emotional discomfort, but a threat the human mind has been trained to fear for thousands of years, long before cities, governments, or even spoken language. Shame was the first social weapon. Tribes used it to discipline members. Leaders used it to silence challengers. Entire civilizations built their power on the idea that someone who is humiliated becomes easier to control. Shame didn't need chains, prisons, or violence. It needed only one thing: an audience. The collective gaze of the group was enough to bend an individual's will. Empires rose using it. Religions enforced obedience with it. Communities sustained order through it. And even now, in a world that claims to be more evolved, shame continues to operate as silently and effectively as ever through social media, institutional pressure, and subtle interpersonal manipulation. Those who use shame understand something most people overlook. Humiliation is power. It shapes behavior. It restricts freedom. It weakens identity. But what if that power could be reversed? What if you could break anyone who tries to use shame as a weapon? Shame is often mistaken for a simple emotion, but beneath its surface lies an ancient psychological structure built long before civilization. In early human societies, survival depended on unity. To be accepted by the tribe meant safety, warmth, and shared protection. To be excluded meant facing the wilderness alone. Because of this, the human mind evolved to treat social rejection as a life-threatening danger. Shame became the internal alarm system, warning us not to fall out of favor with the group. Modern people rarely realize how deeply this instinct still shapes them. When we feel shame, the brain responds as if physical harm is imminent. Research shows it activates neural pathways similar to those triggered by injury. But unlike physical pain, shame targets something far more fragile: identity. It does not say, "You did something wrong." It whispers, "Something is wrong with you." That distinction is what makes shame one of the most powerful psychological forces ever created. Manipulators, consciously or not, take advantage of this flaw. They understand that shame creates confusion, self-doubt, and psychological paralysis. It forces people to question their worth, their decisions, and even their reality. Throughout history, institutions perfected this tactic. Ancient leaders used public humiliation to maintain order. Medieval societies used stigma to enforce obedience. Even today, modern systems from corporate cultures to online communities deploy shame to regulate behavior. This is the hidden mechanism behind social control. Shame conditions people to silence themselves long before anyone else needs to break those who weaponize shame. You must first understand what shame truly is: not a moral truth, but a primal lever designed to keep you compliant. Not everyone uses shame with the same intention. Some do it impulsively, unaware of the damage they inflict. Others use it deliberately, strategically, as a subtle form of psychological warfare. To break anyone who weaponizes shame, you must first understand the types of people who rely on it, because shame, in their hands, becomes a mirror reflecting their deepest insecurities. One type is the moral judge. This person hides behind righteousness, using principles and morality as shields for their own desire to dominate. They shame not to uphold truth, but to elevate themselves. Their power comes from portraying others as inferior, sinful, or unworthy. The moral judge thrives when people feel small, because it allows them to feel large. Then comes the fragile ego, a person terrified of their own weaknesses. Instead of confronting their flaws, they project them onto others. By shaming someone else, they create a temporary illusion of superiority. Their attacks are not expressions of strength, but confessions of inner fear. There is also the social manipulator, the one who understands group dynamics. They shame to control narratives, to shape perceptions, to appear more competent or more dominant in public spaces. Their goal is not truth, but influence. And finally, the insecure narcissist, whose identity depends on admiration. To them, shaming is a tool to maintain hierarchy. They use humiliation to keep others beneath them, because equality feels like a threat. These archetypes reveal an uncomfortable truth. Those who use shame are rarely strong. They are usually frightened, fragile, or desperate. Their weapon is not confidence, it is insecurity disguised as authority. Once you reshame, leaves marks that are often invisible, yet profoundly shaping. Unlike anger or fear, which flare and fade, shame sinks deeper, embedding itself into a person's self-concept. It alters how they view themselves, how they interpret the world, and how they believe others perceive them. This is why shame is so effective as a tool of manipulation. It changes the mind from the inside out. One of the most destructive effects of shame is the internal narrative it creates. Instead of questioning the person who delivered the insult, the victim's mind turns inward. Thoughts like, maybe they're right, or maybe I deserved it, begin to form. Over time, these thoughts evolve into beliefs. Shame convinces people that their flaws are not actions to be corrected, but identities to endure. This psychological shift leads to self-policing. People alter their behavior, not because they want to, but because they fear judgment. They speak less boldly, express fewer opinions, and shrink themselves to avoid becoming targets again. It is a subtle but powerful form of control, one that leaders, governments, and institutions have used throughout history. Medieval societies branded individuals to mark them as inferior. Ideological regimes used public denunciation to break dissidents. Even modern social media operates like a digital coliseum, rewarding public humiliation with likes, shares, and visibility. What once required a village now requires only a viral comment. The truth is stark. Shame doesn't just change what people do, changes what they believe they're allowed to be. It conditions them to remain small, predictable, and silent. Understanding these hidden effects is essential, because the moment you see how deeply shame infiltrates the mind, you begin to see how urgently it must be confronted. Cognize these patterns. The shamer's power begins to unravel. Breaking the power of shame does not begin with confrontation. It begins with recognition. The first and most important step is understanding that shame is not a reflection of your truth. It is a reflection of someone else's intention. The moment you view shame not as a verdict, but as a tactic, something fundamental begins to shift. The weapon that once pierced you becomes visible, identifiable, and therefore defeat-able. Most people internalize shame automatically. They assume the pain means the accusation must be valid. But shame is not evidence. It is a conditioned response. When you strip it of authority, when you say, even silently, this feeling is a reaction, not a revelation, the emotional grip weakens. The shamer loses their advantage because their power depends on your unquestioning belief in the emotion they trigger. This shift is known in psychology as cognitive distancing. You create space between the instinctual feeling and your interpretation of it. Instead of absorbing the insult, you observe it. Instead of collapsing into self-doubt, you examine the motive behind the shame. This moment of awareness is transformative because it reverses the power dynamic. You stop reacting and you start evaluating. Philosophers across history echoed this insight. The Stoics taught that what harms us is not the event, but the judgment we attach to it. Nietzsche warned that society's moral condemnation is often rooted in weakness, not virtue. To see through shame is to see through the illusion that others have the authority to define your worth. This is the beginning of liberation. Not by fighting the shamer, but by refusing to let their words become your identity, once the spell of shame is recognized. The next step is transformation, turning defense into strategy. Those who weaponize shame rely on compliance, hesitation, and doubt. Their strength lies not in truth, but in your willingness to absorb their attack. When you refuse to submit, the power shifts. The moment you act consciously, shame can be neutralized and even reversed. The first tool is unreactive confidence. By refusing to display pain or embarrassment, you deprive the shamer of satisfaction. They seek a reaction. When none comes, their influence begins to collapse. Silence becomes a weapon. Calm becomes a shield. Next is identity reversal. This technique is subtle, yet devastating. Instead of directly confronting the attack, you highlight the insecurity or hypocrisy behind it. By exposing the shamer's own fear or weakness, you force them into discomfort without raising your voice. Their shame becomes their own. Unexpected boldness amplifies this effect. Shamers anticipate withdrawal, hesitation, or apology. By responding with calm decisiveness or unapologetic confidence, you disrupt their expectations. The power they assumed they held begins to crumble. Finally, public reframing can cement the shift. When shame is used in a social context, reframing the narrative exposes the manipulator's motive. Others begin to see the shamer not as an authority, but as someone desperate to dominate. The psychological hierarchy reverses. These tactics are not about cruelty. They are about reclaiming autonomy. Shame only works when you allow it to. When you observe, reflect, and respond strategically, the weapon loses its edge. The attacker becomes unstable, vulnerable, and exposed. The moment you refuse to internalize their judgment, their control evaporates. The lesson is clear. Power over shame is power over the shamer. Shame only works on those who surrender to it. Its power is entirely conditional. The moment you refuse to internalize it, the weapon becomes harmless. This is why philosophers have long emphasized self-ownership as the foundation of freedom. To control your response to shame is to control your identity. To define your worth is to remove the shamer's authority. Nietzsche warned of the herd morality, a system in which individuals are constrained by the judgment of others. Those who internalize the herd's values are the easiest to manipulate. Shame thrives in conformity because it relies on your need for social approval. The moment you detach from these external judgments, shame loses all leverage. Existentialist thinkers took this further, arguing that authentic freedom comes from defining your own values, your own principles, and your own truth. Kierkegaard described the courage it takes to stand alone, resisting the world's pressure to conform. Sartre insisted that only by acknowledging our responsibility for self-definition can we truly claim autonomy. In practical terms, this means recognizing that every shamer is attempting to enforce their version of reality. They seek compliance, agreement, or submission. But those who own their identity, who refuse to let external approval dictate their sense of self, cannot be shamed. Their stability becomes unassailable because it is internal, not contingent. Understanding this shifts the perspective. The shamer's power is not absolute tight, is granted by your willingness to yield. Once you reclaim your authority over self-perception, the shamer's arsenal is empty. Their attacks, once terrifying, are now impotent reflections of their own insecurity. Freedom from shame is not rebellion, it is clarity. And clarity is the first step toward invulnerability. Shame is not only personal, it is a tool built into the fabric of modern society. The same mechanisms that shaped ancient tribes now operate on a global scale. Governments, corporations, media, And social networks have discovered that subtle humiliation can bend behavior faster than laws or threats ever could. Social approval and fear of rejection are manipulated to keep people compliant, predictable, and controllable. Consider the rise of cancel culture. A single accusation can spread across millions of eyes in hours, creating a digital tribunal where judgment is immediate, absolute, and often unquestioned. Corporations shape consumer behavior through campaigns that induce shame-targeting appearance, wealth, or lifestyle to trigger insecurities. Political institutions, meanwhile, cultivate narratives that frame dissenters as immoral, irresponsible, or dangerous, ensuring conformity without force. Algorithms amplify this effect, feeding outrage and reinforcing the idea that deviation equals punishment. The mechanisms are refined, subtle, and relentless. What once required a village now requires only a networked society. And the ancient instincts that make shame so effective have not weakened. They have been weaponized at scale. Understanding this is crucial. The personal struggle against shame is inseparable from the societal forces that exploit it. The same clarity that allows an individual to resist manipulation also exposes how power operates collectively. Those who recognize the patterns see that breaking free from shame is not just an act of self-preservation. It is a form of resistance against a system built on control. Fear and social pressure, society thrives on the willing absorption of shame. Refuse it, and you disrupt their most effective machinery. The journey to breaking anyone who uses shame as a weapon is, above all, a journey into yourself. It begins with awareness, grows through understanding, and culminates in mastery. By recognizing shame for what it truly is, a tool designed to manipulate you, strip it of its authority. By understanding those who wield it, you reveal their insecurities, their desperation, and the fragility beneath the facade of power. The final step is the internal shift, reclaiming your identity. True freedom comes not from confronting every shamer or seeking revenge, but from refusing to let their judgment define your worth. When your sense of self is anchored internally, no external condemnation can touch it. The attacks that once shook you now glance off like shadows. The power dynamic reverses. The shamer becomes unstable, exposed, and powerless. This is more than a personal victory. It is an assertion of autonomy in a world structured to condition compliance. It is a reminder that the greatest control lies not in dominating others, but in mastering yourself. Those who use shame as a weapon are always afraid of weakness, of exposure, of irrelevance. Once you stop fearing shame, you stop fearing them. You become untouchable, not by cruelty, not by force, but by clarity, courage, and the unwavering conviction that your identity belongs to no one but yourself. Freedom from shame is the ultimate power,